Well, it's been about 24 hours now since voting started in Nigeria, the West African nation that everybody is looking at right now. With over 93.4 million voters, the number of voters more than the entire population of the rest of the West African countries combined. And there's been a lot of, recent development, a lot of novel happenings that we've never seen before in this country. And a lot of people are excited to see how this turns out. Now, a lot of updates on social media. And of course, News Central has been following this up for you. And here we are again giving you the updates. My name is Blessings Mosugu.
And of course, my name is Dapo Adegboye. On that note, we say welcome once again to the Ballot Nigeria, where we keep you up to speed, real time, with the happenings across Nigeria concerning the presidential and also assembly and National Assembly voting taking place currently in the country. Yesterday, it's been a beehive of activities across Nigeria. News Central has been on ground in virtually all the many of the states that, of course, this has been happening, and a lot has actually went down. I mean, from Lagos State to Kano State,
of course,
to Abuja,
and we had our correspondents in almost every key state that mattered.
Key states, and it's a good one because just like we've been emphasizing yesterday, this particular election is a pivotal one in Nigeria's history. We know that 2015 was a major one, but this also is equally important because for the first time in Nigeria, at least, we are seeing more than the two, well, I call it candidate system that even though we practice a multi-party political system, at the end of the day, it's usually two people. But this time
now
around,
there's a third force.
There's a third force, and some people are calling the fourth force probably a dark force somewhere, and
let me just put this out there, right? No matter how this election results turn out, there is this wave of excitement and participation from the youth that has never been seen before. And this is the first time, according to INEC, that they're having as many people who registered actually vote. We've had a lot of cases of, a lot of people didn't come out to vote, but there's been cases of people who register and a number of them refused to come out. But this time around, under the rain, in the sun, a lot of people were out there to vote for who they wanted to see in power. And
that basically tells you that Nigerians are beginning to believe. Well, I call it believe right now.
There's this level of awareness that they have.
Exactly. And then coupled with the reality of the situation, there's scarcity of currency, scarcity of fuel, hardship. They will tell you it's a motivating factor.
And let me tell you
that has pushed a lot of people out there.
It looked as though immediately this election started, every other problem disappeared and everybody came together as a strong force. I don't know if you noticed that.
I did.
It was really surprising. Up until now, there's been complaints here and there, no cash, we can't move. But yesterday was massive turnouts in different polling units.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. We had quite a number of our correspondents out there, and the turnout, in certain polls, like Bernard, for instance, in Kano State, as early as 6 a.m., the queue.
A lot of people slept over.
Exactly. So that's to tell you that people really want to see a government that is truly representative of them, right? And I think it's also a call or a reality, a call to reality that it might not be business as usual when it comes to elections in Nigeria. If you can do the job, they vote you out. If you can do the job, they canvass for you and try to put you in, right? So, all of that happened yesterday, but of course, it didn't come without some of the challenges that were faced in some of these polling units. Part of it includes long queues, delays, the late arrival of INEC officials and materials.
And talking about novelty.
Some pockets of violence.
Speaking of novelty, there were certain places in, polling units where the INEC officials lamented that they haven't been paid, so they will not be doing their job. And people are wondering, did you just know that you weren't paid as of that day? It felt as if everything was coming together to work against people's vote. And then there were also instances where, at the end of the voting, a lot of them were not able to upload, and people are wondering what's going on. I think now a lot of people are asking, is this what it has been? Or is it because people are now aware? Because usually when people vote, you can attest to that you just vote and go home. But this time around, everybody's waiting around to make sure that their votes count. So they're noticing that people can't upload and they're asking, is this how it has always been? And has it in any way affected the elections in previous years?
Well, true. Now, talking about uploading results, a lot of people have also brought to the question the idea of the voting system, the beavers.
Beavers, yeah.
That the beavers, the idea should be as you vote, it's automatically,
I mean, that's the that's the
transferred
entire idea.
I mean, that's the narrative. But apparently, aside just voting, the officials need to sort of, I guess, collate it and then officially sort of upload it to the INEC server. So, I mean, that particular area still remains a bit gray, but I'm sure we'll shed more light on that one as the program progresses. INEC has started uploading some of the results, though, in some polls, and we'll be keeping you up to speed on that one.
And you know something else that is very interesting, Dapo? The fact that the president of Nigeria, I mean, it got a lot of people talking, the fact that he voted and displayed his vote. That is something, some people were saying that it's always his style, and others are like, should that vote be valid? And that's something I would really be interested to know from our guest today.
Yes, and it wasn't just the president alone. Also, as Senator Uzo Oji Kalu, you know, also displayed his, even though some are saying it's actually void because of the way he voted. But I mean, we'll keep you up to speed on that one. Just to also let you know that we have a guest that will be joining us via Skype this morning, of course, in person of Jide Benson, a public affairs commentator. Jide, thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Good morning,
Good morning. It's our pleasure.
You guys are doing a great job.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, we can as well start off the conversation, Jide. Let's start on a pretty much generic note. What was your experience like yesterday?
My experience was good where I voted. The first thing that I'll say is that I was very impressed with the turnout. It was unusual. When I got out to my polling booths, my mouth was open because I'd never seen that much turnout. I never knew that my polling booth had that many people. I mean, I've been voting there for the past 4 election cycles. And then, of course, I met a lot of my new neighbors, or I met a lot of neighbors. So it took me about 1.5 hours to vote, accreditation and eventual voting. And voting went on very smoothly in my polling booth. However, right across the road from where I voted, the turnout was maybe ×4. And they were there for much longer. After we had finished voting, there were still a lot of people. The queue was very long. And we had a lot of international media coming to that particular polling unit to ask questions. And just as that was going on, a small bus appeared from somewhere, and 4 gunmen got down and fired shots, and they snatched away the ballot box containing the presidential votes.
Right in your area?
Yes, this is on Akerele in Surulere by Falulu Junction. Yeah, so they fired shots into the air and they took the ballot box for the presidential polls away. Other than that, most parts of Surulere were good. Okay, I rephrase. Surulere inside was good, but we started to hear skirmishes in places like Aguda and Ijesha. So ballot box snatching, people were being prevented from voting, and that was very sad.
All right, you said that this happened, but not directly where you voted, right?
It was right across from my polling unit. So I voted at James Robertson Junction, and Falulu is right across James Robertson Junction. So we can always see what's happening on the other side of the road. Okay, but so that's it.
Were they able to count that of your own unit eventually?
Oh yes, they were able to count this. My own unit was counted, but the others, the police came to the rescue of the INEC officials after that incident had happened, and voting had to stop. So they took them to the collation center.
I mean, for obvious reasons, these thugs are being bankrolled to disrupt the elections. But one might wonder, why does this happen? Why do we keep seeing a repetition of people trying to sabotage the elections and the electoral process?
Very simple. We have gotten to the tipping point, or we have gotten to the breaking point. Nigerians are tired. I'll say it again, Nigerians are tired. People came out yesterday to show their anger, to show how fed up they were, to protest. The young people, even the elderly people, the first-time voters, the new voters, people who used to live in Surulere came a day before. I met 3 of my childhood friends who had come to pass the night in hotels in Surulere just because they wanted to vote. I met someone who had come from Isolo, who used to live in Surulere, came to pass the night. My sister was talking to her friend who lived in VGC, and the person walked all the way to Admiralty just because they couldn't drive because security men were stopping them. So people invested in yesterday. Whatever it took, people were ready to vote. You probably have seen the video of the woman who was scarred on her face and had 2 plasters. That also happened in Surulere. I saw the video of her being treated and given injection on her face, and she still went back to cast her vote. So people have gotten to the breaking point, and whatever it was going to take, people were ready to vote. And I'm happy that I've heard the reports that INEC says voting will continue in some places today. At about 12:30 yesterday, at about 12:30 a.m. this morning, in parts of Victoria Garden City, people were yet to vote, and they were waiting patiently. So that tells you a lot. Nigerians are tired.
All right. Now let's of course backtrack a bit. Let's look at the process this year. The idea of the BVAS as against what we had, in the previous years. How would you rate this particular technology being employed this time around, as regards delivering credible results?
I'll say that the intentions were good, the intentions were noble, the intentions were pure. However, I can't say same about execution, because we've heard reports in many parts where the results were not uploaded, were not electronically transferred as ought to have been. It's either the INEC officials were being funny, or there was no service, or there was no light, or the things powered out. That's one. In some places, you had so many voters on the queue and you had just one BVAS machine. Those are the reports that I got from certain places. So based on the number of people in a particular polling unit, INEC ought to have made more than one BVAS available. As a matter of fact, in some polling units, if they had 5 or 10, it wouldn't have been too much. So the intentions were noble, but the execution, I think, was poor.
All right. Now, another issue will be that there's always been the case of, there's a visible appearance of preparedness, but when it comes time to actually deploy, the initiatives like the BVAS, then something goes wrong. I remember that INEC mentioned several times that they've never been more prepared for any election like they are for this one. And then we're seeing another case, a different case of the BVAS not functioning. And some people are saying that the BVAS is actually reliable, but is the network in the country reliable? And that's another problem that, we need to talk about. Now, we would give it to the INEC. There were some places like the trailer that fell, the vehicle that fell carrying some INEC, materials was replaced almost immediately. So we'll give it to INEC for that. But in some other places, like you said, seeing just one BVAS machine for over, almost 1,000 people, and people are asking, were they really prepared for this election?
Well, one can't be over-prepared. There will always be challenges when it comes to execution. And the question to ask is, did they have a backup plan? In some instances, it looks like they didn't. In some instances, it looks like they did. And there's also the possibility that there were fifth columnists within INEC itself. Don't forget that human beings can be compromised. So some political parties or some politicians could have infiltrated the ranks of INEC to ensure that their officials did their bidding. So these are some of the challenges that I saw yesterday. So yes, INEC was prepared. When the issue of lack of cash and access to money became an issue, they got commitment from the CBN that they will be mobilized with as much cash as they need. In terms of performance, I'm not sure that they did a lot, but we still have today to monitor the polls till the end, and then when the results start to trickle in officially, and I emphasize officially because there's been a lot flying around yesterday, and I've decided not to pay attention to that. When the results start to fly around, when the results start to be released officially, then we'll begin to put the pieces together to know how to rate INEC in terms of performance.
Well, I want to pick on the aspect of the cash scarcity and also the fuel scarcity. Would you say it had any form of impact on voter behavior in this election? Because reports also added that in some inner villages, I mean, people that registered probably far away couldn't access their polling units because they didn't have cash to move around. Do you think in any way that impacted on people's voter behavior this time?
I think very little. As I said, Nigerians were determined to cast their votes yesterday, whichever way the pendulum swings, and this pendulum could have swung in any of four ways because we had four leading candidates, or some people say three, but let me just leave it at four. Everybody had known that there's been no fuel for about 4 months. And so I think people had made up their mind to trek. And when I say trek, I mean trek, take long strolls. I don't think that anybody needed money to cast their ballot yesterday. The issue of lack of scarcity had nipped the idea of vote buying in bud. I don't know how well the networks functioned yesterday. There had been rumors that the networks were not going to function well from a day or two to the election. So anybody that had the idea of transferring money to people to cast their ballots was on a wild goose chase. But I doubt that the lack of petrol and lack of cash had much impact on people's desire to vote. People had resolved to vote. The people in my neighborhood who have always had their voters card but never cast their vote, I saw them yesterday and they were excited to vote. I mean, I saw quite a number of people who were saying that this is my first time of voting, and I engaged them in conversations. They just never believed that their votes were going to count, but yesterday appeared quite different.
Now, Jide, let's compare what's happening now to what we used to see before. Like you said, things are different now. A lot of people didn't believe that their votes could count. And aside that, you know, in the previous years, there were a lot of disenfranchised voters for some reason. And then there were also the cases of low voter turnout. But this time around, people are coming out en masse to elect their leader. Do you think that that will have any impact on the results as we're expecting?
Sorry, I missed the part of your question. Sorry.
I was saying that we should compare, you know, what's happening now to what we used to see before in Nigeria, where a lot of people were disenfranchised and some people, like you mentioned, didn't believe that their votes could count. You know, not to talk of the fact that there were a lot of cases of low voter turnout. But this time around, it's like all these things are not in play here. So a lot of people are coming out en masse, regardless of the situation, to vote. So do you think that that will in any way affect their votes or, you know, at least hinge them closer to the change that they're looking for?
Oh, yes. The awareness, the excitement about this particular election is unusual, whether it's from the local community, the local media, the international community, and I dare say the youth population. It was as if the youth had a conference or a summit on a WhatsApp group and said, you must all go out to vote. Like I said, the investment, the personal investment that people made to vote in this particular election is unprecedented. It's something that students of political science will have to deal with when the curriculum of political science and possibly history and international relations is changed. People have voted. People are still desirous of voting. What I think it's the politicians who are most shocked about this. If you have seen some videos of the extent of excitement when the votes were being counted, and those who decided to be bad boys and bad girls, we saw that they decided to stop the vote in their tracks by ensuring that the ballot process was not completed. People's votes will count regardless, and it's going to be the coming days will be very interesting. When the results are finally announced, I also see that there will be a lot of interesting judicial fireworks, legal and judicial fireworks.
The results, I mean, are being announced eventually, and of course, the follow-up to that.
Yes.
But I want us to come back to security right now. In
Yes.
parts of the country, a day before the election, places like Lagos, for instance, we saw show of force, right?
Yes.
Military rollout, police rollout. They paraded some streets just to let people, just in a way, some will say to give a sense of confidence to people that don't worry in terms of security. The government has it on lockdown. How would you rate the security, performance yesterday, not just in Lagos, but, you know, across the nation, compared to the show of force we saw a day before election?
I think that the rehearsal was better than the command performance. Yeah, because what we saw was such that would keep everybody in check. But when push came to shove, many times the security personnel were nowhere to be found. It was more of a reactionary move by major security forces rather than a preventive one. Again, in parts of Surulere, incidents had happened, and then you started to hear sirens, and you started to see convoy of security men going to those places. So if they had that much vehicles, whether it was armored tank or Heliox vans or whatever, why were they not centrally stationed in some places? So don't forget that people who were up to mischief also had their own agenda. They also had their own plans. So in some of the places where these skirmishes happened, what must have happened was that those people would have noticed that there are no security people in the neighborhood. They quickly act, steal ballot boxes, disenfranchise voters, and when people start to raise alarm or take pictures and start sending on social media, all of a sudden you find that the convoys are moving and they're going in that direction. The deed has been done in most cases. So that's why I say that the rehearsal was better than the command performance. I think that a lot was spent on security, but for the fact that the security agencies were not there when needed to prevent some of those things, it gives them a low score.
Now, Jide, let's also look at, aside the fact that, the security personnel were absent when they were needed, there were cases that, went viral on social media where some security personnel were present and some thugs were still threatening people not to vote for a particular party. If they were going to do that, they should head home. And that leads me to wonder, does it mean that the security sector is compromised?
There's no doubt about that. Like I said, we're all human beings, and there's an extent of compromise that every human being can witness. Now, when you say security presence, there was security presence. One policeman, unarmed, not with a baton, not with a gun, not with a canister of tear gas, in a polling unit where you have hundreds of people. You can't see. There's just presence. There's no show of force. There's nothing to deter anybody that wants to be mischievous or wants to misbehave. And I noticed that in quite a number of polling units in my neighborhood. You just had a policeman who sat down there, relaxed, was detached from the process. And so if a group of boys came and wanted to misbehave, I don't see how one policeman would have been able to stop boys, even without them carrying any weapons or machetes or any of those things. So I think that there needs to be a lot more investment in security presence. When you have a policeman, for instance, does the policeman even have a walkie-talkie to call for backup even when he is in distress? So the personal security of the security person, the security official, is even at risk. Because if the people want to get mischievous, they can go after the policeman first to disable him or to hurt him. So,
all right,
even the security personnel is at risk.
Interesting. Well, I want us to do a bit of comparison here. The 2015 elections, for instance, was a pivotal one in Nigeria's history. I mean, an election that saw a transition from a particular political party that Nigerians had been used to, for 16 years, a change in party, ruling party, to the party that we are currently experiencing. This also, the 2023 election is also considered equally pivotal because for the first time, Nigeria that, over the years, even though we're a multi-party system, we're used to 2 eventual candidates. But this time around, we are seeing about 4 of them. What else would you say makes this...
And it's a tight one.
Exactly. What else would you say makes this particular election, in a way, different and very important?
The emergence of the third force and a fourth force. They didn't just emerge, they emerged within 7 or 6 months, if you like. And the momentum that they were able to build very organically. I think, again, however this election, the pendulum of this election swings, whoever wins will know that the game has changed, that it is not business as usual. So if they had planned to perform, I think that they will up their game in performance because they want to return to office. If they didn't, if they thought it was going to be a child's play when they get into office, I think by now they'll be having a rethink, because there's been some interesting and unusual upsets. 4 main contenders when it just used to be either A or B. That's a bold statement. And don't forget, There are a lot of dots that connected to make 2023 elections happen on the part of the populace, that's the electorate, and on the part of the political class and the incumbents. I think that perhaps the best or the only legacy that the outgoing government wants to leave is the quality of elections organized. And that's because I think that Nigerians have good amnesia, let me put it that way, would remember only the last things that a person did in his dying days in office.
Interesting.
All right, Jide, let's also talk about what the Constitution says about, underage voting. Now, we've had cases like that a lot of times, especially from, the 3Ks, as they call them, the northern states, where a lot of children come out en masse to vote. And several times it looks as though their votes actually count. And it brings us to ask, what exactly does the Constitution say about under 18 voting?
Okay, so first, that's why we need to go back to this issue of BVAS. Yes, there was accreditation, your thumbprint was taken, but is there a biometric check on the ballots? Because many of the underage children that many of the underage voters that you refer to were probably not accredited, and anybody used any of those ballot papers. So when the legal and judicial fireworks starts and some of those ballot papers are subjected to biometric checks, that's when we begin to compare what the BVAS captured and the thumbs that were on the ballot papers. I do not think that there was a fantastic correlation between the accreditation process and the thumbprinting that happened. For instance, in some places we heard about massive thumbprinting. So it means that one person could have thumbprinted 10 or 100 ballot papers. So except that person was accredited, or except those ballot papers are subjected to biometric test or examination or scrutiny, we cannot say that the BVAS was a game changer. It was a game changer to the extent that you were captured before voting, because in the past what just used to happen was they'll check a sheet of paper, they'll see that your name is there, they'll compare your picture, they'll compare your PVC with what they have, and then they'll put the indelible ink on your thumb, and then you can go ahead and vote. But now there's a device that has captured it. But does that correlate with what has been thumbprinted? I doubt very much. And again, the coming days would reveal a lot more. And I hope that INEC will do a good job of reviewing itself. And I thank God that there were lots of international observers and monitors and even the media. So there needs to be an extensive review of the entire process before we go to the next elections.
All right. Now, still on the issue of the capture and the BVAS, some of the officials were saying they still need to upload the results to the INEC server. And that, of course, has got quite a number of people confused. The narrative is that once you thumbprint on the BVAS and it immediately registers, on the INEC server. That's the logic people actually have. Would you like to clarify or give some sort of clarity to how the process itself works, or should have worked?
Even when I thought I understand the process, oftentimes I sometimes got confused. So my thinking was that once a voter is verified or accredited, it will be uploaded on the INEC server. But it looks to me that it is after the INEC official has completed the process of verifying everybody and presses the send button or maybe the green button that the thing will be uploaded. So I think that they need to come back to explain to us. Now, similarly, when the ballots were counted, and in most places publicly, when the ballots were counted, I don't know how the BVAS was going to be able to transmit that result electronically. So I'll give you an example. The INEC chairman had said at the press conference a day or two before the election that voting was going to commence at 8:30 and was going to end at 2:30. However, anybody that was on the queue before 2:30 will be allowed to cast their ballots, even if it ended at midnight, which happened in some places. There's a neighbor of mine who got to the polling unit at 2:35, which was 5 minutes after 2:30. And she was told that she couldn't vote because it was already past 2:30. Now, I understand that she couldn't vote because she was not on the queue before 2:30. However, the INEC official said that the Beavers machine has shut down. So the question is, did the Beavers machine recognize that there were no human beings on the queue? Was artificial intelligence involved? Was there virtual reality? Was there some scientific or traditional connection between the beavers and the people in the neighborhood? Those are questions that deserve answers, because what if there were people on the queue? Would the beavers machine have shut down? Or is it that lack of idleness for a certain amount of time, for a certain period of time, would automatically shut the beavers machine down? So, because I don't think that if people were on the queue, the Beavers machine would have gone out of use. It's like our computers or our phones. When you're not using it for a certain period, it times out and it locks and you have to access it again. So what the INEC official said was that the thing had shut down and people could not vote anymore. So again, there will be need for a lot of explanations. This is the first time the Beavers machine is being used on a large scale. It was used in isolated instances in Osun and Ekiti. And we've also seen that it has been subjected to scrutiny in the courts in Osun. And I expect that a lot of that would happen after this round of elections.
Well, still on that, I mean, this has also, some people have expressed concerns concerning how well trained some of the INEC staffs are as regards using this equipment. And also the level of orientation, public orientation, from INEC as regards how to vote on the part of the voters, and even the general election process. Number one, how would you rate, from your own experience, the level of training these INEC officials had, on the field, and also the level of orientation? And what do you think how much of this do you think it will impact on the eventual outcome of this election?
Okay, so let me start from the INEC officials and the training. I think that as a country, we need to invest in the idea of volunteering, because don't forget that there are a lot more ad hoc staff that INEC uses on days of elections than its entire official staff across the country. The number of ad hoc staff are a lot more, and many of the people who work as ad hoc staff, they're not doing it purely on the basis of volunteerism. I mean, before you got started, you talked about complaints about INEC officials. Some of the people who worked yesterday who are not gotten paid, and on account of that, they were not going to release the results. So we're not very invested in volunteerism. People who tell you that they want to volunteer for certain things are actually doing it with expectations of getting paid. So it will be easy for such persons to be compromised by party agents and politicians at the polling units. And we saw a few of those instances. And therefore, the quality of training that even INEC could have given would be limited, because a lot of them may not even pay attention while the workshops and the orientation exercises are going on. They just want to be at the polling unit, submit their bank details, and expect to get paid immediately after. So we need to visit the idea of volunteerism as a country. Some of the people who got excited about voting for the first time, some of the people who invested themselves, their time, and the energy could also have volunteered. Because INEC is also made up of the same people who are confronted with the same problem in the same environment. We're mostly Nigerians. And so will all of this impact on the process? Oh, yes, it will. It will a lot, because, like I said, some of the INEC officials were compromised, could be compromised. The politicians know the loopholes because they do these things for a living. They know which areas they can go to get INEC officials to backtrack. Also is the situation where in a lot of polling units, the feeding of the INEC officials is left to the voters, it's left to the party officials. In a lot of places around, you find people sharing food to INEC officials. I'm not saying that is wrong, but when I eat your food and I take your drink, something else could follow. I would be relaxed in my relationship with you. And that is an opportunity for a lot of people to insert what is not supposed to be inserted into the process.
Right. All right, Jide, let's also once again take a look back at history and compare to present time. Now, since the beginning of a multi-party democracy 24 years ago that marked the end of a military rule, that's in 1999, the PDP has ruled from that time till 2015, and then the APC took over, and that was a merger of the CPC, the ACN, and the CNPP, and that now in recent time makes people think of the possibility of a new party, regardless of when the emergence was, taking over the rule of a country. How do you see that? Do you think that there is a possibility to that? Because if you had asked in 2015, there possibly have been people who didn't think that another party could take over, but the APC did. So do you think that there's a possibility that another party takes over now?
Oh, yes. For any party, I think that in Nigeria, as we are now, as our political evolution continues, as our democracy becomes less nascent, for any party to be able to upstage the party in power, certain factors must be in place. The quality of the candidates, the extent of awareness in the country, the extent of despondency in the country, and the extent of disgruntlement as well. We have witnessed all of that in the past 8 years. Another factor that would need to be in place would be the ability of the contending political forces to come together. That's what we saw before the 2015 elections, where you had the opposition parties, the ACN, the CPC, a part of APGA, a part of AMPP coming together to say, let us work together. It was a political SPV. So we have seen that there are 18 candidates for presidency at this time. I think that they should begin to consider the options of working together for maybe the next elections, to some of them to subordinate their ambition and say, look, there's a greater responsibility for us to salvage our country than for us to continue to leave it into the hands of two political parties. But I'm happy that we saw a third force and an organic movement, and we saw a fourth force. And don't forget that the third and the fourth forces were based on the individuals primarily. I mean, you know their names. The individuals primarily were the brains behind the third and the fourth force. And I think that is a signal that if you perform in the previous opportunities that you have had, and the people can vouch for you, you can be a force to reckon with at elections when it is time.
Now, one conversation that, of course, has been in the front burner also has to do generally with candidacies. The fact that young people get into the political process. Are we beginning to see that happen in our current, will I say, political events across the country now compared to what we used to have before?
Oh, yes. It goes back to the point about awareness that I've mentioned a few times. And of course, there's the not too young to run bill. A number of the people who were born maybe in the 90s, just before our democratic experience started in 1999, they don't know that they have to, in quote, wait for a certain turn. They're a younger demographic, they're daring, they're enterprising. You can call them the digital natives. They don't see why they have to wait for so long before they get into the political process. And thankfully, like I said, there's the not too young to run bill. And what has happened in certain countries around the world have made us to realize that young people actually stand a better chance of making changes, of fast tracking the progress of nations, because the risk appetite is higher. The energy is there. Creativity and innovation reside a lot more with the young people. So you don't have to be an ancestor, a geriatric, before you want to run for certain office. You don't have to be stopped in your track, in your own self and in your own corner. If you're able to start things in your community, start to mobilize people, you can make a change. And also the entry stakes are lower now. All that needed to be done before through traditional means can now be done through digital means. And so there are organic movements that can be started without you seeing people moving around. And I still see that is going to happen in the elections that will take place in a fortnight from now. Young people need to get more involved. There have been sterling examples of young people in the political process from 1999. The youngest governor at the time in Nigeria gave a good account of himself. We've also seen young people who became governors who have been a complete disgrace to what the youth generation is. So there are good young people, there are bad young people, and they're on all political divides.
All right, Jide, still talking about the not too young to run bill. It was signed in 2018 by Buhari, and that's the current president, the incumbent president. And the aim was to reduce the age limit of those who will be allowed to run for office. But the question now remains, why do we still see the over 60s running? What is that discouraging factor? Now, it's a great move, towards the right direction, that a lot of youth are coming out to vote. But why are they just voting and not participating actively in running for office?
Reducing the age to run for certain offices is one thing. Reducing the financial entry barrier is a different thing. So when you say that, for instance, and if you say, for instance, that somebody who is under 30 can run for the presidency or for the governor, and the cost of acquiring an expression of interest form or the other form is put at 60 million or 100 million, how many 30-year-olds or how many 35-year-olds can really afford those amounts of money? So one thing has been given to you, but the more important thing, which is the financial part, the stakes of those are still high. And that's part of the mistake that a lot of people made in 1999. And it's an excusable mistake because people had been disappointed time and again. A lot of people didn't think that the military was really going to leave in 1999. So those who took a chance and got into the office, they raised the stakes. They raised the financial stakes of getting into the political fray. By 2003, the cost of getting forms to run for offices had skyrocketed because the incumbents wanted to be able to control the political process. And by the time they were leaving in 2007, the situation continued. And we have seen that. We saw how much the government, the party in power sold their forms, 100 million naira. We saw how much the other party sold their forms, I think about 40 million naira or 60 million naira just to get a sheet of paper. Now, when they make concessions for the female gender. Some parties will say, oh, okay, the women will pay half or they'll pay nothing for the expression of interest form, but they'll pay for the other form. Some parties also did it for their youth contestants, but many of those young people were only contesting for things like House of Assembly, or maybe at best House of Representatives, not the Senate, not for governor, and not for House of Representatives, not for presidency. The parties where you find a lot of young people are the parties that are not, in quotes, mainstream parties at this time. What they need for now is candidates to fly their flag.